Okay. If you open up your Bibles to Romans chapter 1 tonight, we aren't finishing Romans chapter 1 tonight, but we are we're continuing to go through the book of Romans. We started chapter 1. We've had 2 messages in it already, and now we've got 2 more messages to go in it. And tonight we are looking at Romans chapter 1, and I'm just going to kick it forward, starting with verse 18. And the title to tonight's message is When a Culture Comes Under Judgment. Sometimes, and I remember Billy Graham was asked about the United States once, and this was a long time ago. And Billy Graham said, if God doesn't judge the United States of America, he's going to have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. Now that, of course, gets some knowing nods, and, the way he phrased it was very clever. But the truth is that the judgment on the United States of America started before I was born. It ain't my fault. No, that's okay. Anyway, the judgment clearly started before I was born. And that judgment has been cascading and snowballing ever since then because, a lot of voices are raised up trying to stop the slide that is causing the judgment. However, it's not enough, and we don't own the airwaves. The people that own the airwaves are the people that are helping foster the slide. So we're going to talk about that tonight so that you have more of an understanding of what I'm talking about and why I can say with great confidence the judgment of the United States of America started a long time ago. So we are in Romans chapter 1, starting with verse 18. We've just heard the Apostle Paul say, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes. What a powerful statement. And the promises are to the Jew first and then to the Gentile, because Paul always went to the synagogues first. He always wanted to share with his own people the message that he had learned about Messiah and what it could mean for them. And then he'd go out to the Gentiles, because he was the apostle to the Gentiles. That was his main call. But he recognized the debt that the Gentiles owed to the Jewish people, and he made sure he himself, even though he was Jewish, walked it out in every community that he went to. So, Romans chapter 1, verse 18, for the anger of God is being revealed from heaven upon all ungodly activity and lawlessness of men who hold back the truth by their lawlessness. Now that's a mouthful. It's a mouthful because there's no commas in it either. But the anger of God. Now, some of your translations will say the wrath of God, but it's the normal Greek word for anger. And as I translate through scriptures, I tried to not use, if I saw the word thumos come up, which is anger, I let it say anger. If I saw, not wrath, just because I thought the context was nicer with wrath. It sounds wonderful, doesn't it? But it's really, God gets angry over sin. Why does God get angry over sin? Because it hurts people. When God says the wages of sin is death, he is not saying the wages of sin is death because I'm going to judge you. He's saying, when you sin, you break the fabric of how I created this earth, and you bring sickness, disease, and suffering into this earth. The payment, the wages for not living in accord to the pattern that I have set up in this world is that pain is released and death is released. And God's angry about that because he's given us the remedy. He's given us the answer so that we don't have to receive the wages of sin, so that we don't have to suffer and die the way that people generally do. And I think it would be the same as if people that we loved were senselessly harmed. You can imagine that if you were one of the people, a relative of one of the people who was shot in Kansas City on whatever day it was, just early Wednesday was the 14th. We were doing the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Memorial and that day, which is the anniversary, 6th anniversary of what happened there. That awful shooting, and all of a sudden the report comes in on another February 14th, 6 years later, 20-some people were shot in Kansas City as they were celebrating the victory of the Chiefs over the Super Bowl. Everyone thought right away, what, is it a terrorist attack? Is it some lone gunman? No, it turns out it was a couple of kids who were members of gangs who decided to have a shootout in the middle of that crowd. That's the latest report I read. Maybe they've updated it since then. But it's like, this is crazy. And if you're a relative of one of those people, especially one of the 9 children that were shot, you're going to have some anger. You are going to be very angry. Number one, you're going to be very concerned for the children. But number two, you are going to be very angry about the fact that your relatives, your children, were in harm's way because some people that have no sense of responsibility or understanding of consequences of actions are doing something that is just totally inconceivable. And if you're a relative of one of the adults, if you're a relative of the woman who was killed, good night, are you going to have anger? You're going to have to deal with some anger. Well, God, why are you angry? Because this is wrong. This harm, this wonderful celebration was marred by death and people being hurt all over the place, and there's no way you can't be angry about it. And God's angry in the same way because we've broken his creation, and what happens is it creates all the pain and suffering and everything else that we see in the world. Good news is that the gospel is God's powerful answer. It's the powerful answer to God's anger, because when we preach the gospel, hearts are changed, and people quit breaking creation, or at least they get better at it. And, by learning about the way that God created the fabric of this creation to be lived in. And then life is released, not death. So the gospel, the message of Jesus Christ, that he has opened up the door between us and the Father in heaven, that through his suffering and death, he paid our debt. He paid our death. That's really what he did. And he paid our death, and then we, because he's God, it counts for all of us, and then we, by trusting in him, we get his life. And, Jesus said when he was walking with his disciples, he said, I've come that you might have life and have it abundantly, or have it to the full, or have it in an overflowing measure. That's what he wants for us. That's his intent. So God's anger is released against impiety and justice. Impiety, that's a complex word. It is about those who hold no fear of deity. That's impiety. They have no fear of deity. They regard nothing as sacred. And then injustice, we all know what that is. It's wickedness. All wickedness is at its core a lack of justice. But we live in a time of injustice everywhere. Okay, it's everywhere. And then he said, for the anger of God is being revealed from heaven upon all ungodly activity and lawlessness of men who hold back the truth. And one translation said suppress the truth. It's really probably more of an it's not that they're purposely suppressing it, it's they're repressing it. It's unconscious. And they're just holding it back because of how they live their lives, because of their worldview, because of the fact that they don't even give God a nod. And they just ignore everything that he has put into play. Okay, next verse. Because what may be known about God is easily known by them, for God made it clearly known to them. Okay, there goes all the excuses. Because what Paul says is these guys are holding back the truth, and God's angry about that because what may be known about God is easily, do you see the word easily? Easily known by them, for God made it clearly known to them. What that's saying is God's not hidden. There's books out called The Hidden God, because there are a lot of ways that God is hidden, but in the way that the Apostle Paul is talking about, he is definitely not hidden. We're going to get to that in just a minute, because God has made himself obvious. And you say, how has God made himself obvious? Well, he tells us in the next verse. For from the creation of the world, his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood by what was created, so that they have nothing to present in their defense. Okay? They have no excuse, nothing to present in their they can't say, I didn't know you existed. I mean, that's what, everybody that doesn't know God, who stands before the Lord in the judgment, is going to say, well, I didn't know. And God's going to say, I gave you all the evidence you needed. And you just ignored it. You said, what a shocker. There's millions and millions of galaxies in a universe that is infinitely complex. And if you study anything about science, you know what a miracle it is. There's life even on this planet. And there are so many different ways. You think about the complexity of our lives and all the ways that God does things. And you say, wow, it's really a coincidence that it just all came to existence by chance. And you've just proven that you don't have two brain cells that work together in a very good way. Mathematically, the creation of this universe is impossible by chance. It just is. And if you don't know that, you need to study it, because I just stated something that's very true. Okay, from the creation of the world, his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen. God has revealed himself in creation. His eternal power is obvious in creation. Why? Because anything big enough to create this universe is big. That's called eternal power. It's beyond our understanding. And God is the one who put it on display in creation. Paul talks about it later on in the book of Romans, quoting an Old Testament scripture, and he says, they have cried out. The heavens have cried out. They have let us know there is a God. He is here. His deity is obvious, because there is all of this complexity around us. I remember D. James Kennedy talking about the giraffe. He was trying to explain to people, you know how the theory of, the selective evolution and ongoing. He says, when you think about it, a giraffe, do you know how complex the mechanisms have to be so that when it lowers its head to get a drink, it doesn't blow the top of its head off with the blood pressure? I mean, seriously. You know how much blood pressure it takes to get the blood up all the way to the head of that giraffe? So the first time that there was a really tall animal with a giraffe neck, it said, oh, look at that, I'm thirsty, put its head down, blew the top of its head off. Well, it couldn't reproduce. And any of its kind couldn't reproduce because they were dead. So there's no way that it could, you understand, how do you recover from that? There are so many things. If that giraffe's, there are so many mechanisms in the back of its head that make it work. Valves in the heart and everything, just make it work. So it just goes down, gets a drink of water, gets back up, and all of that blood pressure that is powerful enough to blow the top of its head off is taken care of. Okay? Why? Because God does things that are amazing, and so that we look at it and go, wow, that is complex. He puts so many things into creation that there's just no way. There's no way. Time plus chance does not explain anything. Okay? So, his deity is obvious, and our response to creation is critical. One of the things people, by the way, this is an argument against the fact that people have to believe in the Lord Jesus Christ to be saved. People use it all the time. They say, well, what about the people wherever who never heard of him? God's got that covered. It's right here. It's plainly evident in all creation that there is a God. All creation. And the indigenous peoples around the world throughout time have been able to look up into the heavens and to say, Wow. Now, most cultures came up with the idea, independently of one another, that there is a creator and he is God, and they began to work out ways of worshiping him. Those who asked would get an answer, because God always responds when we are humble and we seek him. If we humble ourselves and we seek him, he will respond. I remember when the old Dr. Livingston, I presume, thing, that was the guy that was exploring Africa, and he was going everywhere, circuitous route. It was awful. He was trying to get the gospel out to missionaries or to villages, and he was trying to go wherever he felt the Lord was leading him, and his health was poor, and it was awful. But when he got to one tribe, they said, "We've been waiting for you." And he said, "What do you mean?" He says, "We were seeking the true God. We knew what we were worshiping was not God." Because they did like everyone else did. They had images and stuff like that. And he says, "We realized this could not be God." You know, you make a wooden idol and then you burn up half of it. That's a whole mockery thing in the book of Isaiah. You cook your food over the other part of it. But they said, "We knew we had to seek the true God," and God gave us a vision of a white man that they had never seen or heard of in their entire existence, in the deepest, darkest parts of Africa, from where they lived. And he said he told us that he would tell us about the true God. Now think about that. These guys responded in their hearts and said, "We want to know who the true God is," just at the same time that there's this guy doing a circuitous route through the deepest, darkest parts of Africa, and he gets to them and they say, "Oh, you're here finally." He had to be thinking, huh? Because God was preparing their hearts. Obviously, the Holy Spirit is still involved in that. He's wooing people. The Holy Spirit's job is to woo us to Jesus, but before he woos us to Jesus, he has to woo us to the idea that there is a God, and he works hard to get those blinders off of us. Right now, there's so many blinders because the world has worked hard to get rid of the idea that this place was created. And they've substituted something called macroevolution, which, as I've said before, mathematically does not work. And Darwin, he thought it was the single simple cell. That's what he called it. It was like a ping pong ball. He kind of imagined every cell. You know how incomprehensibly complex every cell is in our body? I mean, it's an amazing collection of biology, way beyond Darwin's wildest dreams, the complexity and the way things work together in our bodies. But there was, Watson and Crick were the guys that discovered the DNA strands, right? They all say yes. Okay, good. And Crick, I think, was the mathematician part of it. I might be quoting the wrong guy. But anyway, he decided to do the odds of one single simple cell. He used Darwin's terminology to come into existence by chance. One cell, just one. And Darwin's terms for it were the single simple cell. And I don't have the math at my fingertips, but the number was so large. Obviously, it had to be scientific notation. It was so large that Lecomte de Noy had already determined, there's a mathematical number. Everyone knows this. If the odds against something are greater than this number, it is universally impossible. And that was from Lecomte de Noy, who was a mathematician. Crick figured out what would it take for one single simple cell. Remember, our cells are far more complex but he just said, let's go with Darwin's theory. And the odds against it were multiple times bigger than Lecomte de Noy's number, that everyone accepts as fact. that anything with odds against it greater than that number are universally impossible. So on the one hand, we got math saying this is impossible. On the other hand, we got people saying, I'd prefer that over God. But really, that's the choice. I remember D. James Kennedy again talking about he was listening to Julian Huxley talk. And Julian Huxley was the head of UNESCO at the time. And so this was quite a while back, but he was the grandson or great-grandson of Aldous Huxley. And Aldous was Darwin's, if you've got the beast, you got the mouth of the beast. That's the scriptural thing, right? You've got the guy who's got the idea and then the guy who advertises the idea. Aldous Huxley was the guy who advertised the idea. So Julian Huxley was being interviewed on the news, and Julian Huxley was asked, why do you think that the idea of evolution caught on so quickly? Why do you think it swept the world? And you'd expect a renowned individual, knew his granddad and who knew how things had changed virtually overnight in the world. You'd expect him to say something like, well, the evidence for it was overwhelming. You'd expect for him to say, well, we had studied this or we had studied that and we determined. That's not what he said. This is what Julian Huxley said on camera. The idea of God was inconvenient for our sexual mores. And that's not a word we use anymore, mores, right? It just means habits. The idea of God was inconvenient for the way that we want to have or express ourselves sexually. Because God's got some pretty strong standards. And again, if you violate God's standards, there's that inconvenient thing. What inconvenient thing? The one that says death. And we don't want that released in our lives by misusing it. But Julian Huxley nailed it right there. He says, why? You know why? Because everyone was looking for a way to get out from under the restrictions that God put on us in our sexuality. And you think to yourself, boy, is that dumb. Therefore, although they recognized God, they did not honor him as God or give him thanks, but they have been given over to nonsense in their discussions, and their half-witted hearts have been darkened. This is even before Facebook. Okay? It says, although they understood, they experienced God, they recognized him, they recognized that there was a God in creation, they said, yeah, but I'm going to make God in my image. That's how most cultures did it then, because the idea of God was incompatible with their sexual mores. And so they made God according to their fashion. It's amazing how many cultures have temple prostitution as a part of their worship. Wow, that's really interesting. They made up a God that required them to have as much sexual activity as possible with poor people whose job was to stay in that temple. They were prostitutes without the pay or the benefit of being prostitutes, and lots of disease and sickness and all the other things in those cultures that came with it. It's not quite as bad a job as the guys who came up with the idea of sacrificing virgins in the volcanoes. You know who I can say without any doubt did not come up with the idea of sacrificing virgins in volcanoes? The virgins. Okay, that's for sure. Okay. They didn't think this was a great idea. People come up with their own ideas, and it just depends on how sick and demonized they are. You either about a God or you come up with something that's oppressive, because that's the way it turns out every single time as people take advantage of other people in the name of God. You know, a culture's path to prosperity is to focus on God, okay? It says, although they recognize God, they did not honor him as God or give him thanks. Those who acknowledge God and give him thanks. And if you do that, you're in pretty good shape. Honestly, as a culture, you acknowledge God and you give him thanks. That's a great thing. One of the reasons I'm so involved in this community is we have a community where right now, the leadership of this community acknowledge God and they want to come together and give him thanks. They come to the Thanksgiving Unity service. It's a big deal on the city calendar because they're like, we want to say, thanks, God. We acknowledge your existence and we say thank you to you. Do you know how unusual that is? Okay, that's awesome. To me, it's a culture's path to prosperity. And by the way, it doesn't mean the culture's right after that. These same people that are doing that may throw themselves, out into what all sort of, profligacy. I mean, whatever. They just could jump into whatever. I don't know. But I'm saying the culture as a whole says we need to acknowledge God. And we give thanks to him for the blessings that he gives to us. That's a big deal. So we honor God by acknowledging him. We thank him for his gracious help. And if we don't do that, it's the path to futility and foolishness. If you want to ignore God, you are on your way on a slide, and it's not a great slide. It says if people want to ignore God, it's confidently claiming that they are wise, they have demonstrated that they are fools. They substituted images in the likeness of corruptible man, bird, animals, and reptiles for the glory of the incorruptible God. And that's what happens. And if we don't do that stuff anymore, we'll worship other stuff. I mean, it's just the way it is. Sometimes football teams, sports teams, people get that because we've got something on the inside us that wants to worship something. And so people become fans. You know what that's short for? Fanatic. Okay, it used to be a religious term. Okay. You are a religious fanatic. And so now we have it, fans of sports teams. By the way, I'm not against being a fan of a sports team. I'm somewhat follow the Green Bay Packers. Don't watch them, but I really would like them every once in a while to make it into the playoffs and go to the Super Bowl just for old time's sake. And because they are one of the most storied franchises in the history of the NFL. But other than that, so it's okay to follow sports and to enjoy sports or to do whatever hobbies and whatever, but there are people that give themselves over to things that it's obviously filling a hole somewhere that needs to be filled by deity, because when you get to the point, last time I went to a football game, it was with the congregation, with people from the congregation, and we went, Ron just ouched. Because what we didn't know is the person who was making all the arrangements was not a Miami fan. The person was a Philadelphia Eagle fan. They were playing the Eagles. And so he put all of us with all our Miami gear in the Philadelphia section. Now, Philadelphia fans, it may be called the city of brotherly love, but they missed the memo. And we're sitting there. I mean, someone got on a big award on the field at halftime, and they all booed him. Who does that? Okay, Philadelphia fans. It got so bad. There were so many bad words, we'll just leave it there, flying past our ears as we are there with our kids. And I actually got up and I had to address them. Okay, which is probably dangerous when you're dealing with Philadelphia fans, but I knew Ron had my back. And they calmed down for a little bit because they realized, the women especially were saying, "Oh, they got kids along, guys, stop it." And but it didn't change much. Those people, when you got people that are responding that way at a sporting event, not just cheering on your team, but absolutely vitriolically hating the other guys, you got issues. There's something missing on the inside. You've put something there that ain't supposed to be there. Because that idea that you should hate a football fan, we had a guy killed in Miami recently who, what was he, a Buffalo fan? Okay. And they were apparently trash talking, and one guy killed the other guy. It's like, okay. The guy who did the shooting had stuff in his heart that he put something there besides God. And eventually led him down a very dark path, and he committed murder. So, wow. We may not make the birds and animals and reptiles, but every time we claim to be wise and deny there's a God, it's self-deception. One day we're going to stand before God, and boy, then you're going to really look foolish. It'd be better if we didn't. fool ourselves now. So, by the way, the test always is, how's that working in your culture? If this idea that there is no God, which has taken root in the United States, if that is such a great idea, how come our culture is going downhill like this? It's going downhill so fast, it's amazing. I mean, and so you say to yourself, why is that happening? You know, when I was growing up, the idea that the police could not go, and I know this was not back when the dinosaurs were roaming the earth, okay? But the idea, even as recently as the 80s, and I mean, there were some pretty bad areas in Los Angeles. They had movies about it and everything. But the idea that it's commonplace today around the world that police have no-go zones. They just simply won't go into certain areas of towns anymore. They have handed those areas over. That's not working real good at a cultural level. When you're losing whole areas of your culture to lawlessness, it means your culture's in trouble. And that's because it'll spread. It's just the way it works out. If you honor anything and everything except God, you're going to end up in a really bad place. So what's the first thing that happens? What's the first sign of judgment when God is being ignored? Next verse. Therefore. What's it there for? It's pointing back and saying, based upon what I just said, they recognize God, but they refuse to honor and thank Him. Therefore, this is what happens. God handed them over to moral impurity in accord with the sexual lusts of their hearts, so that they treated their bodies shamefully with one another. They exchanged the truth of God for the lie and worshiped and served the creation instead of the one who created, who is praised forever. Amen. Okay. So, what's the first step of judgment? God hands people over to themselves. Well, that doesn't sound so bad, does it? Boy, yeah, it does. Because when He takes away there's something called grace. And when there's a lot of grace on the culture because there's general recognition of God. Again, they don't have to be Christians, just general recognition of God and honoring God, recognizing He's there. You still might live like the devil, but the culture itself is doing pretty good. That grace is there, and that grace keeps the culture in pretty good shape. That grace restrains people. God's grace will really restrain people from acting out their worst behaviors publicly in a way that hurt the culture. And what happens is when that grace lifts, that's the therefore. God hands them over and the grace lifts. And then what happens is the restraint that was holding back all of that bad activity is suddenly gone. So God handed them over to moral impurity in accord with the sexual lusts of their hearts, so that they treated their bodies shamefully with one another. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie. So He removes moral restraints. That's what this is saying. He removes moral restraints, and destructive promiscuity results. And that's why I know that God started judging the United States of America before I was born. You say, wait a minute, the sexual revolution was in the 60s. Oh, no. Have you ever read any of John Updike's books? The sexual promiscuity started in the 50s in a big way. It wasn't in the, Ron's nodding his head. Yeah, we got the fruit of the flower generations in the 60s and the summer of love and all that, but that had already been, the reason they ended up living like that is they saw the hypocrisy of what was going on in the United States of America already in the 50s. God was removing the restraints, and what happens is there was just a whole lot of immorality going on already in the 50s, very commonplace. And God was already handing our nation over on many levels. And you say, wow, yeah, it was starting. And it starts slowly because God's very merciful. And however, the lie inevitably destroys a nation, because the core of any nation is the family. And if you destroy the family, you eventually destroy the nation. Okay, you all know that those shooters yesterday or Wednesday in Kansas, you check them out, you'll find out there were no fathers in their homes. You know that. Right? That's just the way it is. And you understand. When you've got young men who are acting with that level of irresponsibility, there's not going to be a strong father figure anywhere near them. That's the destruction of the family. That's what happens to it. God has designed households to function together. You destroy the family, you begin to sow the seeds of the destruction of the culture because a wildness is released. You know this story about the elephants. There were a whole bunch of young bull elephants that were terrorizing a particular area, and they were just acting out. They were doing things that were nasty. They were killing other animals. They were doing all sorts of stuff. And and elephants don't eat meat, so it wasn't because they were eating meat. It was because they were doing this, bully elephant thing. And so what the nation did, the people that were in charge of that area, they put in older bull elephants. And the older bull elephants took names. And all of a sudden, the younger bull elephants all fell into line, every single one of them. And the problem went away because they got the old bull elephants in there to take care of the young bull elephants. And suddenly everyone was flying straight. Well, when you destroy the family, you don't have the bull elephants, the fathers, to be able to help raise up their children. And it eventually destroys a nation. And we're watching that right now. There's 18 other judgments by the time we get done. There's 18 more judgments coming up, but the subsequent judgments after the first two, they're just results of the first two. But then the nation slides more and more and more. By the way, therefore God handed them over to moral impurity. This is supposed to be the first thing. As soon as you see it, you go, whoa, we've taken a wrong turn. The nation is going to end up, right about where we are right now. And if you think what we've got going on is really good, you are not looking at what's really going on. People are dying everywhere indiscriminately, and it's only going to get worse because lawlessness is reigning. We've got gangs coming up from other countries to rob the rich around here. And by the way, you're rich because you live in the United States of America. This lie inevitably destroys a nation, but by the way, God's still got his glory. We'll all stand before him one day. He's still going to be the glorious God of heaven. All we've done is destroy our own nation by ignoring him. If you think, I'm going to ignore you, God, that'd be like your kids looking at you when they're 3, 2.5. Well, I'm mad. I'm going to look this way. And eventually they're going to come around and they're going to realize, I'm hungry. Or I need my diaper changed. Whatever. That's how God's glory is still going to be intact without us being involved. He's not offended by that. He just knows that death is being released for everything that he does, and he's trying to, or everything we do, and then he's trying to get us to repent, and so he says, okay, I'm going to lift the restraints a little bit because that'll get your attention. You'll realize we're a mess. We can't go this way. And what the news media did is they mocked everyone that said that. They made series on televisions to mock anybody that was morally conservative. I remember the first ones. You do too. And all of a sudden things were being pushed further and further and further. And any old meathead could be involved. On account of this, God handed them over to dishonorable passions, for their females exchanged their natural sexual function for that which is contrary to nature, and likewise also their males left their natural sexual function with females, and were consumed with their passion for each other, males with males doing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the preordained compensation for their error. I need you to understand one thing tonight. If you are not a producing member of a culture, a productive member of any culture. In the mindset of Paul's time, that was shameful. That was dishonorable. Because you weren't pulling your weight. Anybody ever see Gravity? That's the one with the black hole, right? The wheat harvester that would come in and come to the house. I think that was Gravity. No, that was Interstellar. Yeah, that was Interstellar. Gravity was the one, I think, with what's his name floating around somewhere. Yeah, well, it's always good to see George Clooney kick the butt. Anyway, as an actor, I pray for his soul just like anybody else. Okay. But yeah, Interstellar. In Interstellar, there's this scene where there's been some kind of tragedy that hits the earth, and so population is a real big deal. And so the hero is about 35, 40. He's already got children, and his dad looks at him and says, there's a new school teacher in town. You should go check her out. It's time you start to pull your weight around here. You know what he was saying? He was saying, get married, settle down, and start having more kids, because we need more kids. And I thought, wow, that really, to me, that was like one of the most pro-family things I've ever seen in a movie. Go and get together and build your culture. Okay, so in that culture, the idea that you were not a nuclear family, by the way, when I say nuclear back then, it could also mean that you had, you had, the way the Romans had it set up, it was, they were married for respectability and legitimate children. They had concubines for more variety. And then just because every once in a while you needed it, there were the heterai, which is just their way of saying prostitutes. That was just their basic culture, but they understood the requirement of raising up family, or the culture dies. You understand, in Roman culture, they everything went. They had every type of sexuality that you can imagine, but if you didn't raise up family, that was shameful. So when you read this in that context, you understand a little bit more of what is being said to the Roman culture to whom Paul is writing. He's saying, guys, this destroys cultures. It's built in. You all know this. We're supposed to be pulling our weight. We're supposed to be building the fatherland or the motherland or the whatever land we have. And we're supposed to be a productive, functioning part of that culture. And when that doesn't happen, it doesn't work out. Now, the first judgment is to cause people to repent, and they say, save the culture. And if they don't, God says, okay, I'm going to lift grace a little bit more. And now you really should start becoming concerned. Because when he raises that second one, we have one step further toward the destruction of the family. Well, actually, it's not really the destruction of the family. It's just that there isn't family. And that's the problem. So that, by the way, and I've got it there, it didn't benefit the culture. And so Romans even understood that there was dishonor to not benefiting the culture. And natural relationships benefit the culture they produce. Genesis 1:28, God blessed Adam and Eve, and God said to them, bear fruit, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and over all the animals that move along on the earth. You know that right now there is a huge amount of concern about the birth rate. When you drop below, I believe the number is 2.2, you're in trouble. When you drop a few points under that, it's irreversible. Right now, I think I read Japan's at 1.78. You know what that eventually means is you got all these old people with no young people to support them. The entire Social Security system in the United States is built on the idea of having more and more young people around who can support the elderly who are retiring, and that, as I get closer to retirement, they aren't really elderly. Just want to say that, the retirement age. So anyway, when the birth rate goes way down, one of the theories for why the government is so interested in a replacement population, I shouldn't say replacement, but augmenting the population by keeping normal border restrictions down on the south side is because of the fact that they recognize that we do not have enough people in the United States to make us be able to go forward. So the idea is to get them all in, to grant them blanket amnesty, make them into productive citizens, and then be able to collect all those nice taxes from them so that we can... You get the idea? And I think right now we allow 50,000, well, I don't know, I shouldn't even say that. I heard that from someone, but I didn't check it. We don't allow a whole lot of legal immigrants into the United States. We do a lot, but every nation has limits. Okay, this is my, that's not my, shameful activities don't benefit the culture. That's the idea. Now, I got this paraphrased. Now, this isn't, okay. I translated what you've already seen. So you've seen the Randy Cutter version. And now you're about to see the Randy Cutter paraphrase. I'm paraphrasing my own stuff. That's amazing. Anyway, there's something not quite right about that, but I did it anyway. Because of this, God gave them over to non-productive desires. This is paraphrasing. Even their females exchanged profitable natural intimacy for that which is apart from natural reproduction. You understand? Just putting it into those concrete terms of their day. Likewise, also the males, having abandoned profitable natural intimacy with women, burned with passion for each other. The profitable there is it produces children. That's the idea of profitable. Men were performing actions with men that did not benefit society and were receiving the normal results of their error. Okay, that is the RCP version. It's not nearly as accurate as the first one, and down to earth, and there's different ways you can parse that, but it really does talk about that societal benefit thing, which would have rung a bell with the Romans in a big way. They would have been, he was writing to Romans, and they understood all this stuff. So verse 28, since they did not think it was worthwhile to acknowledge God, God handed them over to a worthless mind to do things that are not proper. And now there's going to be 18 descriptions of what is not proper, and you're going to look around our culture and say, that's normal here. The 18 things, because it says you get handed over, and I told you, we've been under judgment for a long time. There's the line of demarcation was when all of a sudden it became acceptable to ignore God's will on sexuality, and it did not start with the summer of love. It started way before that. And eventually it came out into the open in a lot bigger way, but before that it was a wink, wink, nod, nod type of thing. They didn't retain their recognition of God. It starts them on the slide. They have a worthless mind. They have worthless understandings, and these things destroy nations and cultures. That's what's going on. We've been under judgment for what? 60 years? 60, 70 years? God's patient, by the way. We all think, well, he's going to just pull the plug. Well, eventually there's going to be a plug pulled, but we're probably the ones pulling it. Nations fail because on the inside they fall apart. But, okay, God is good. He has better things in store. I am not ashamed of the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. That's the message that can avert all of this. And I can't change an entire culture, but I can change individual hearts, and so can you. And that's our job. We touch people's lives, individual by individual. We live ourselves acknowledging God, asking him for his grace, growing in our relationship with Jesus, and watching him change our lives so that what we know about who we are becomes evident to everyone around us. It's what we do. Well, let's pray. Lord, I thank you for this opportunity to study your word in Romans. I ask that you would give us every ability that we need to be able to stand in righteousness and life and still love all the people around us that are messing up in so many different ways, because we ourselves have messed up in the past. We thank you for your forgiveness, and I ask that you would make us gracious people who are always reaching out in love to others, no matter where they fit on the list, so that we might be able to offer your life always. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen.